I rode a ton of new coasters this year, but you might notice this list hasn't changed much since last year. But there is a new king of awful coasters. I tend to skip the bad rides and focus only on good rides, rather than credits, when I go to a new park. But anyway, there are a ton of bad coasters on this planet, and in today's video I'm going to count down the 10 worst I've had the unfortunate opportunity of experiencing. If you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing. I would really appreciate it. Let's dive in. Number 10. Viper, an Aero Mega Looper at Six Flags Magic Mountain. This is the last of a dying coaster breed, and I guess it's a classic, but this thing's notorious reputation is very well deserved. From the top of the first drop, until the train hits the brakes, there is not a second where you don't have to brace your head in order to not hit the over-the-shoulder restraint. The ride is forceful, and because it's classic and actually has a pretty unique layout for nowadays, it isn't super bad, but nonetheless not an enjoyable ride at all. Number 9. Gemini, an Aero dueling coaster. This thing is great for being a classic, but not much else. Super bumpy ride, and overall the experience is confused. It's definitely not a family coaster, but it's a boring thrill coaster, so I'm not really sure who this ride is for. Plus, it's extremely rough. I respect this ride, and I barely had to wait for it, and my expectations weren't really high, so I wasn't too upset. But nonetheless, this is definitely a one and done. Number 8. Magnum XL200, the original Aero hyper coaster. Located not too far from Gemini at Cedar Point, this Aero coaster is clearly a thrill coaster, but that brings up some problems. First, the ride is not necessarily rough, but the transitions are definitely not smooth at all, and the weird boxy trains don't do the ride any favors. Also, I found the final line of airtime hills more unpleasant than enjoyable, as my legs slammed into the super hard lap bars. All in all, this ride is just eh, and when I see people rank this in their top 20, or even their top 50, I have to question their sanity. Number 7. In Vertigo, a Coma inverted Boomerang. Now we're getting into the coasters I really don't like. I think what really bothers me about this ride is that people say it's good, which could not be further from the truth. People love to talk about how forceful this ride is, and I have to agree. My head was forced into the hard over-the-shoulder restraints multiple times during the ride, not to mention the bland layout and short ride time, which might be for the better to be honest, and this thing has terrible capacity. Honestly, just skip it, unless it is zero line and you're in the mood for a little bit of brain damage. Number 6. The Racer, old dueling woodies at Kings Island and Kings Dominion. I'm lumping the two racers together, because I've ridden both, and they're both equally terrible. Extremely rough, forceless, and bland. I really don't like these rides. The jackhammering is genuinely brutal. I thought I was deformed after I got off Racer at Kings Dominion. The valleys on these things are awful. I would pay someone to marathon these all day, but I definitely wouldn't cover their medical bills. Number 5. Boomerang, a Vekoma shuttle coaster at basically every park, but only one in California. These things are just pointless and unpleasant, extremely rough, bland, low capacity, and just overall bad rides. Another example of the terrible Vekoma restraints, and the layout is just repetitive and rather barf-inducing. Just skip these if you're at a park with a half-decent coaster collection. Number 4. Harley Quinn Crazy Coaster, a Skyline piece of trash. This thing was only around for the short time, and I think I had the, not privilege, but the opportunity to ride this thing, and I took it. Obviously, this is a super repetitive, but also extremely rough coaster, which made no sense, because it's brand new, plus it uses the same track as the RMC Raptors, which is very smooth. Anyway, it's also super low capacity, and a ton of reliability issues, which is the main reason they took it out. RIP. Number 3. Vekoma SLCs, at basically every park, but only one in California. These things are truly awful rides. So incredibly rough, and you have to brace yourself for every element in order to not have your brain turn into a smoothie. The layout actually isn't terrible, but the roughness is so unbearable it completely overshadows any good aspects of this ride. Number 2. Grizzly at Kings Dominion. This is one of those rides that truly makes me question what planet I'm on after I hit the brake run because my brain has been slapped around so much. Truly awful. This is basically a worse racer. I rode them back to back, so I was out for the count. The jackhammering is the worst of any coaster I've ridden. It is impossible to underestimate how rough this thing is. I would honestly just skip this no matter what, especially if you feel like functioning like a normal human being afterward. Just awful. The worst coaster I've ridden, and what very well might be the worst ride on the planet, is the B&M Torturous Hellfire stand-up Vortex at Carowinds. I am lost for words to describe this thing. First, I waited like an hour, so I guess that's insult to injury. Anyway, this is a stand-up, which is inherently unpleasant and just unnecessary, but the horror starts right away with the wonky profiling onto the first drop. The corkscrews on this thing are genuinely the worst element to ever be put on any coaster. Extremely jerky, rough, and your entire body is slammed into the restraint, and there are 2 of these. I'd ride this thing for morbid curiosity, but be careful, especially to those men out there. That's all, folks. Hopefully everyone enjoyed this video. Please consider subscribing. It means a lot to me, and I'll see you all in the next video.